The president thinks that what's good for Nike is good for the American people. President Obama is scheduled a trip for tomorrow to Nike's headquarters near Beaverton, Oregon, just outside of Portland. The White House plans to use the trip to draw attention to the positive aspects of free trade by upholding the state of Oregon and Nike in particular as the leading examples of how free trade deals like NAFTA and the TPP are good for our country. But the benefits that Nike sees are in direct contradiction to what's good for the American worker. Nike may have benefited from the ability to ship manufacturing jobs overseas to pay next to nothing for labor, but what about the good-paying American manufacturing jobs that we lost as a result? White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest asserts that while NAFTA and prior free trade deals did cause American jobs to be offshored, the TPP will raise the environmental and labor standards in Pacific Rim countries, giving American businesses the advantage over China. Take a look.
The view of the president is that if the United States is not the one that is engaging in this economically dynamic region of the world, that we are essentially ceding ground to China. And China will most assuredly try to write rules of the road that further disadvantage American companies who are trying to do business in this region of the world. What the president envisions is going in and reaching an agreement that would actually raise those standards, put them essentially leveling the playing field. And the president continues to be confident that if American businesses and American workers have a level playing field in which to compete, that they're going to perform very well.
Unfortunately, that's impossible for us or Congress to know for sure because the agreement has been negotiated behind closed doors. In fact, it's lobbyists and multinationals like Nike who are undermining the democratic process to influence what U.S. negotiators include in the trade deal. But not everyone thinks that's what's best for the American worker is what's best for America. Joining us now is someone who believes that what's best for American business is best for America, Patrick Hedger, Policy Director of American Encore. Patrick, have I accurately portrayed your...
No, I think, generally free trade or freer trade is better for both sides. I mean, well, you tend to see rising incomes in the nations where these jobs are shipped over to, but you start...
Why should we care about that?
Well, I mean, they're our fellow humans. They're moving from, subsistence farming and toiling and garbage dumps to...
Tax ourselves and send them the money.
No, that would destroy our economy and not leave them any better off. We've done the same thing to the inner cities in this country, and it hasn't worked. But I think trade is generally very good for both sides. That's why people engage in it. Let's forget
inner cities are disastrous because of trade, Patrick. Baltimore used to be a thriving manufacturing center until the 80s and 90s.
I still think, and you look at the overall economy, trade tends to be very, very good for both sides. There was a story in the New York Times in 2004 that actually profiled a woman in Cambodia. And because of a job being outsourced to Cambodia, she was able to go from 75 cents a day scrounging for garbage to making $2 a day in a factory. Now, while all of us would be appalled at a $2 an hour pay or $2 a day pay here in the United States, that buys a lot for a person in Cambodia. And I think we should...
Wait a second. Why am I supposed to sacrifice the downtown Baltimore for a woman in Cambodia? I don't get it.
Well, I think there's a lot more at play at Baltimore. There's a lot of you have a lot of different local regulations, ordinances that are making it very hard to open businesses in those cities.
Nonsense.
But let's look at specific examples of when we've tried to protect jobs in America. In the 1980s, we imposed tariffs to protect the steel industry, and sure, it protected 5,000 American steel jobs. But since steel is an input in all the industries that consumed American steel, they lost over 26,000 jobs in the auto manufacturing sector, in the construction sector, because the price of steel went up. So it became more expensive to purchase cars and produce cars and build buildings in the United States.
People stopped buying cars? Is that what you're saying? I mean,
well, they became more expensive, so they bought less of them. It's basic supply and demand.
So the president, perhaps, I mean, supply and demand function in the context of the game, right? It's like a football game. There are rules for the game. And the tariff rules, when we used to say, okay, you want to make something overseas, if you can make a pair of shoes in the United States for with $1 worth of labor, and you make it in China for 20 cents worth of labor, or Mexico for 50 cents worth of labor, when that pair of shoes hits the American border, there's going to be a 70-cent tax or an 80-cent tax coming from China and a 50-cent tax coming from Mexico. That was put into place during the George Washington administration. Alexander Hamilton laid this out in his report on manufacturers in 1791. And we had tariffs that averaged between 30 and 35% from 1793 until the Reagan administration. And we had growing economy. Cambodia could do the same thing. They could say, okay, you got a woman here who's only making 20 cents a day. She'd like to make $2 a day. Well, why don't we have Cambodia manufacture things for Cambodians? I mean,
well, because Cambodians don't have the money to actually purchase those manufactured things, and Americans don't have the money to purchase more expensive American manufactured goods. I mean, the average American is not going to be able to afford or wouldn't pay for American manufactured tennis shoes because they would be too expensive.
My dad could have back when there were factories, when he was working. You know, he worked in a tool and die shop.
Well, once again, you're improving. We have to measure the wealth of the United States by what people are able to buy with their available wages, and when you artificially insulate these industries where they're able to raise their prices. So if you prevent any competition from foreign firms for Nike and make them manufacture everything here, they'll raise their prices. You'd have to implement price controls on sneakers.
No, you wouldn't, because when you raise those prices, you also raise wages. People have more money to buy more stuff. I mean, the president is going to Nike, right? I mean, Phil Knight's, his I don't know if it was a master's thesis or PhD or whatever, was on how he could create a shoe company that didn't make any shoes in the United States. And that's how Phil Knight became worth billions of dollars.
Well, that's because these countries have a comparative advantage at making these sneakers. A lot of them, and Southeast Asia, they're making a lot of rubber.
It's because we stopped the tariffs. We used to make sneakers in the United States. I used to wear sneakers that were made in the United States.
Well, then were you in favor of the Smoot-Hawley tariffs? Because
absolutely, and the Smoot-Hawley...
And they absolutely destroyed industry.
No, they didn't. That's a complete myth. Smoot-Hawley was a 2% increase in our tariffs, and at that point in time, in 1933... our trade was less than 2% of our GDP. Smoot-Hawley, by the way, was a tariff increase that Herbert Hoover put into place to try to mitigate the effects of the Great Depression.
And it made them worse.
No, well,
international trade dropped by 2/3 overnight, and that doesn't make anybody better. That was because of the Great
Depression. It was because every country in the world was experiencing a depression. It had nothing to do with.
And they all raised these tariffs in order to protect their industries. And what happened?
Smoot-Hawley was a 3 or 4% increase
and that can have a huge.
It was less than 2% total, but I mean it was a tiny. No, it can have a huge percent impact in terms of keeping American jobs here. Average tariffs.
We had the highest
Reagan,
unemployment during the Great Depression. That didn't save any jobs.
No, well, actually, I would say that without tariffs, it would have been a lot worse, and it would have lasted for 60 years. And that's the situation we're in right now. When Reagan came into office, the tariffs were averaging around 30%. Now, U.S. tariffs average around 2%. And let me just finish. What other countries have done when they all said, "Okay, we'll all do away with our tariffs too," right? Because we all did when we signed the WTO and the GATT, is China, Japan, Germany, Sweden, Taiwan, South Korea. They all put into place VAT taxes, value-added taxes. That I don't know the numbers for all these other countries, but I know that they're pretty much comparable. In Germany, the average VAT tax is 17%. So German customers, when they buy a Mercedes made in Germany, are paying a 17% essentially sales tax on the thing. But when Germany exports that car to the United States, they reverse out that 17%. So that's a 17% subsidy of exports. On the other hand, if you want to sell a General Motors manufactured car from the United States in Germany, you have to pay a 17% VAT tax when it crosses the border. So all these countries have put into place the equivalent of about a 30% tariff to replace their tariffs, and that's why they're rich and we're poor.
Oh, I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, if you look at what's happened...
Have you looked at China in the last 30 years?
It's done incredibly well because they've liberalized trade. Yeah, they've done incredibly
they have not
well.
liberalized trade. China has cracked down on trade. You cannot sell.
Liberalized trade. Where was your jacket made?
This jacket was made in Canada, actually.
Okay.
It's damn hard, though, to find anything made in the United States in China, because China has
a comparative advantage to make a lot of consumer
No, they have
goods.
domestic content laws. They have import VAT taxes. I mean, it's like.
All I'll say is from 1990 to 2005. The world poverty rate, people living in abject poverty, fell from 42% to less than 25%.
Right, because our money went overseas.
No, and we've become richer as well because American consumers have more options available. They're able to buy products for less, and their real income goes a lot further.
I studied in China in 1987 in Beijing. I lived in Beijing, and the tallest building in the city was the Hilton, and it was 12 stories. I mean, it was the third world. We did away with our tariffs. We signed permanent normal trade relations with China. I don't recall if it was Reagan or Clinton. And boom, China's exploding, and we get Baltimore and Detroit. And I mean, our cities.
Well, what about Silicon Valley here? We have a different comparative advantage in what we produce. So our jobs
we don't produce in Silicon Valley.
Yes, we do. We make different apps. I mean, we've moved from a manufacturing economy into a knowledge and service and tech-based economy. And that's economic progress. That's like moving from an agriculture economy to a manufacturing economy, which is what a lot of these countries are trying to do.
We can do both. And on top of that, I was in India a couple of years ago. Microsoft was hiring down in Hyderabad. They were hiring thousands of engineers, paying like $30,000, $80,000 a year for people with a master's degree? You really think that our knowledge-based economy can compete when they're doing that?
Well, I think that's good for the rest of the world.
We have people live,
and we're able to purchase those goods for less, and we're able to use that extra income to actually create more jobs and purchase more goods.
Okay, you have the final word. Patrick Hedger, it's always great talking to you.
Pleasure to have him.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks.